I'm Suzette Martinez Standring, and welcome to It's All Right with Suzette, our half-hour TV show on the craft of writing, where I feature authors, columnists, and writers on the whole process and their works. So today we have Rosalind Cuschera, a first-time novelist who wrote a fictionalized memoir about her Italian ancestors, starting with her grandmother Caterina in 1918 and all the way through to 2006. And her first-time attempt at a book has been warmly received, and she won an honorable mention at the 2013 New England Book Festival, which is really quite a triumph.
Oh, thank you.
And so I want to welcome you here today, and very excited to talk about this book, about which I feel to be the dynamics and the sacrifices of immigrants who come to the U.S. Now, in this book, your grandmother, your maternal grandmother,
Right.
Caterina, she is a great beauty. She is married to Antonio, who is killed in the First World War.
That's right.
And she's left with 4 children in a post-devastated Italy.
Right.
Close to poverty, with really no options. And she receives a marriage proposal from an acquaintance she knew years ago in her village, who's
Right.
now made a successful life in America. And he offers her marriage, but the condition is she can only bring 1 child for now
Right.
to
Right.
the United States.
Right.
And so your book really chronicles her experiences, and it also talks about the separation and reunion 17 years later
Right.
with her children, who were left behind in Italy. So, please talk to us right now about this really amazing book based on fact.
Well, I think it was kind of an interesting story to me when my mother used to recount some of her early history, and I tried to capture some of it. My grandmother did have a very difficult decision, and I think people have to understand that for a long time I didn't like my grandmother. I really didn't, because I felt, I would never ever leave my children. I don't care, who this person is and what he promised me. I would never leave my children. But then thinking about the time in those days, women belonged, first to your father, then you belonged to your husband, and then when you got old, you belonged to your son. You didn't have any decisions. You didn't really have a lot of power in your life. And I think my grandmother did what she felt was best. She felt, she wanted to give a future to her children. So this is why I think she made this decision. And then she was originally, he proposed her to take the youngest child, would have been my mother, who was Loretta in the book. She's the baby in the picture.
And that's your grandmother?
This is my grandmother, Caterina. This picture was taken probably about 1917, and it was taken probably from my grandfather, Antonio, who was serving in the Austro-Hungarian war front. And because my mother had just been born a few months before, this is my mother, Loretta.
The baby, Loretta.
Loretta, right. And my uncle, Paolo, in the book, he would be about 8 years old in this picture. My Aunt Dina would be about 6. Geneva would be about 3, 3.5, and my mother would only be a few months old. So when this picture was taken in 1917. And I think she took the picture so he would see the new baby and see them and so forth. But she had to make this decision. It was a very difficult decision. Originally, she was going to take my mother, but my mother was she was not as attached to my grandmother. For some reason, she had because my grandmother was so busy trying to work, I think, she formed a bond more with a neighbor, Graziella, in the book. And my Aunt Geneva was very attached to my grandmother and, was devastated about the fact of being left behind. So she ends up taking Geneva with her.
How old was your mother when your grandmother left for the United States?
My mother was almost 3 years old.
3 years old.
Yeah.
And it was 17 years before they were reunited.
Yes.
Now, in that time, what happened to each of the siblings that were left behind?
Well, my mother actually was she had actually the best life in a sense. She was raised by 2 maiden aunts, and they were my grandmother's aunts in a very small village. And these women were elderly, but they loved her. They loved her very much and were wonderful to her. My Aunt Dina, she was put into an orphanage run by the Sisters of Charity in Naples. And it was a difficult life. The nuns were wonderful, but the problem is that, it was very poor. They only ate food that was contributed to them, and sometimes, it was infested.
Rotten.
It was rotten,
Yes.
It was infested, and so forth. And she, in her own way, was very religious, very attached, loved the nuns. And my uncle was put into a military school in Rome, and it was difficult for him. He was very attached to my grandmother as well, and he always loved her, always, was hoping to be reunited with her. And of course, in those days, the boys in the military were put into the military at 14 years old. So this young boy, is 9 years old almost when he goes into this school, and then he's put into the military. So at 14. So he did serve, and so it took some research too, because he had to, he served in Ethiopia and other wars in Europe.
And Geneva.
She went with her grandmother, right?
Yes.
And they had that experience of being on the boat coming to America, and so forth.
How did you get the characterization for Umberto, her new husband? Because while he seems to be a very physically powerful man and a very almost, at times, self-centered person, and yet your grandmother was very strong in personality.
Yes.
But that first encounter is pretty brutal.
Right. It was, yes. They were both very strong characters, I believe. I actually knew him. I did meet him when I was a child. Yes, I did. And he, I think, in his own way, I think he did love my grandmother. And he, and I think he tried to give her a good life and so forth. And she did like her life in America, pretty much. And and I think some of the aspects of her life too, where she was very generous while she lived here in America with other immigrants and so forth. Some of that I think is because she was a generous person, but I sometimes used to think maybe it was because she felt a little guilty too, that her children were still back in Italy, and she had taken this life, so it might have been a little bit to assuage her guilt.
I think it really brings up a very interesting women's issue.
Yes.
Because I know that there was heavy criticism of her before she left Italy. How could you do this? You're abandoning your children.
Right.
You're choosing wealth over your family and all of that. But in her mind, being a widow of 4 children, she didn't feel she had an option. And this was the only lifeline to future hope for her kids. And at the time she left Italy, she really believed that she was coming back for them in a year.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, she did believe it. I really think she believed it. A lot happened too, and as I say, women didn't have much power then.
No,
so
they didn't have any.
Whatever your father says, that's it, and then whatever your husband says, that's it, and then later it's your son when you're old, that pretty much runs your life. So she had no power that, in a sense. But I think she really felt she was making the best decision.
Absolutely,
and
she was.
A lot changed too. The immigration laws changed in America. So, there was a time there when immigration stopped as well. So, even if they wanted to bring them over, they weren't allowed to bring them over.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because 17 years elapse before she's absolutely reunited with her children.
Right.
And so I think that the viewers would probably want to know what were some of the contributing factors to that delay in getting together again.
Well, I think initially she got pregnant a couple of times.
Right.
And she ended up, having children here. Actually, she ended up with, 4 new children. And, with each pregnancy, she couldn't go. And she didn't have an easy time when she first came over on the boat from Italy. She got seasick quite a bit. So I think she was a little afraid. And then there was just it wasn't a good time. It's not a good time. It's not a good time kind of a scenario, And then, of course, there was times when the immigration got stopped a bit, too. So I think, and then probably, too, I think where her son had started to be in the service.
In Italy.
Yes. I'm sure her husband felt, they're fine. One's with your aunts, and they're fine, and that one's fine, and this one's okay, and she's going to be, a nun anyways. And so I honestly feel that, that down deep that they felt they're okay. They're doing all right.
You know, we in the few minutes, a couple minutes that we have before the
Sure.
break, can you talk a little bit about why you feel this memoir is so important for others?
Well, I feel that I'm trying to encourage people to write their own story, to capture all this information about their own early family, their ancestors, and you don't have to write a whole book, but I think in order to just put some of these facts together for the next generation and future generations. One of my sisters, she did an interesting thing. She just took a little bit of what I said about our family, and she took some of the pictures that I had, and she made a little section, and then she did her husband's family, and then she did her in-laws' families, and so she made this nice little book for her grandchildren.
I think that's so
and
important.
It's wonderful. Yeah, she did a great job. And
I think there's a huge interest in genealogy.
Yes. Yes.
And the way you've made the characters come alive based on, as you told me earlier, postcards and letters.
Right.
And you've
Right.
done a great job of creating the personalities in a very distinct way, because that's not an easy thing to do, chronicling and detailing each of the child's lives
Right.
during separation.
Yeah.
And your grandmother's new life in America, where it was
Right.
quite a challenge with the language and the
Yes,
customs,
cultures.
and a
Yep.
very strong-willed husband.
Yes.
And he was very different from the love of her life, her first husband,
Right.
Antonio, who was very gentle and romantic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. He was very different, and I think that that probably caused a little friction too, because I'm sure she was occasionally, comparing them a bit.
And I'm sure he knew it.
And he knew it. And he knew it. He knew it. My grandmother really, sometimes she believed in destiny and signs. I think the fact that when he first wrote her, he had a beautiful handwriting. He's very artistic. And he also, the fact that he wrote her a letter, because her husband used to write her letters a lot, and she saved some of those letters and would reread them when he was on the walk. And so in some ways she thought, this is a sign. He wrote me a letter, this lovely letter.
Yeah, that's right. She thought that
yeah.
letter from Umberto
Right,
with the marriage
right,
proposal was an
right.
omen
Was an
to
omen,
her.
right.
Yes. Well,
Right.
in the next half of our show, we're going to talk about Rosalind Cuschera's writing process, how she went about it, and the fact that, this first-time novel was honored in the New England Book Festival. So I think that really gives a lot of hope to other writers. And, there's nothing more fascinating than ancestry and family stories. So in a moment, we'll be back on It's All Right with Suzette, our special guest, Rosalind Cuschera. Hi everybody, thanks for coming back to It's All Right with Suzette, where my special guest today is Rosalind Cuschera, author of Journey from San Rocco. And again, we're going to talk about your process in writing this fascinating book about your Italian ancestors and the very difficult separation from your grandmother, of your grandmother's children,
Right.
to the reunion with her children in America 17 years later. It's
Right.
really fascinating. So first of all, where did you get all the information that you based your book on?
Well, a lot of it was family stories, and some of the characters I knew well, and for many years, most of my life. Some of the characters I didn't know that well, but I found about them from other people. I got other family stories and so forth. And also, my aunt, who's Dina in the book, she had a big collection of letters, postcards, greeting cards, even lists of people who came to funerals, wakes, weddings. And my
Wow.
cousin had those, so I made copies of those. So some of the letters are in their entirety in the book. And so I got a basic of the family history and dynamics a little bit there. Also, the public library is wonderful for searching for genealogy, for information.
Ancestry.com?
Ancestry.com is fine, but no, even general books. I wrote to Italy directly, and I got my grandfather's military record. I wrote to the U.S. National Archives, and I got my uncle's military records. I wrote to an archivist in the Catholic Church in my mother's province, and I got a family genealogy back to 1610.
Now, how long did it take you to write the book and to kind of compile all this information?
Well, it took me about 8 years, but you have to know that I took this class and I only had to write one chapter 6 times a semester.
Tell us about the class. First of all, give us the title and where, because people may be interested in attending that.
Well, UMass Boston, the OLLI program, Osher Lifelong Learning, does have a variety of different programs, and they also have a couple of writing classes.
And that's what you took?
And that's what I took. It was called Writing Memoirs and Other Stories, because I decided to try to start writing my mother's story. And so I thought, well, I'll go to this class and hopefully they'll give me some pointers and so forth. So I had to produce a chapter every week for 6 weeks. So, it'll be 6 weeks in the fall, 6 weeks in the spring, so I wasn't really going very fast. But then my class was encouraging me. They really loved the stories, and they were encouraging me and my facilitator, Carter Jefferson, to pull this all together into a book. So I did that, and by July of 2011, actually had about a book together. But my Windows crashed and I lost my whole book.
No!
I did. I had just a backup disc, a little bit backup. Well, it wasn't the whole book though. I wasn't good about keeping it up to date. But I had the disc and I had every single draft of every chapter, with all my edits. So I just started from page 1 all over again.
Thank God you had that.
I did. So that reminds people, keep backing up,
back up, people, back up. Now, your mother, Loretta, was 3 years old when your grandmother left her in Italy.
Right.
And and then how old was she when she came to America? 20?
Well, no, I'm sorry. My mother was really close to about 2 years old, almost 2 years old when she left her. And she was 18 and a half when she came here. So, it was about the 17 years. It's about 17 years. So she was really a baby when she left her.
I'm really curious. Your mom, did she was it like an open wound for her all those years? Was she yearning to see her mother, even though she didn't really know her? I mean, what was it like? What was her reunion like after all those years?
The reunion, she came with her sister, and her sister had, they'd come together. Their brother was still in the service. He could not leave, and they ended up, obviously, he was serving in the Army. So they came. It was hard because they really didn't know their mother. My mother vaguely remembered her because she was still a baby when she left her. My aunt, I think they were both very angry at her, very bitter. My aunt was hoping to be a nun, and so she was fighting these feelings of anger because she felt she should forgive her mother and be open, to this reunion and so forth. But of course, they come into another family too. They're, it's like his family, her family, and their family. So there's that family dynamics as well of what was going on. And they tended to favor the children they had together, which is another hard thing to accept. And the children were all treated a little differently too in the home. And of course, he was still the head of the house, and they had to, contribute their wages and so forth to him, because he made it possible for them to come, and so they were under his direction.
There was one part in the book that I really thought spoke volumes about his personality. Umberto, the new husband, the new father, was when the children had given him a Christmas gift. They had saved money that he had sent them and set it aside so that they could bring him a gift. And his response was, "It's a gift that I bought."
Exactly.
Not,
Exactly.
and to me, it was
Right.
like they could have spent it on themselves.
Exactly.
But
Right.
it said a lot
Right.
about his personality.
Right. Very controlling.
Very controlling. But I thought it was really a well-written book because it really talks about the family dynamics of sacrifice and separation.
Yes.
And trying to find
Exactly.
your way in a new your place in a new
Right.
family.
Exactly.
And
Right.
it's an immigrant's story that doesn't end with the arrival.
Right.
It really gets into
Right.
the
Right.
whole family dynamic.
Exactly.
Now, how did you come to structure your book? I mean, you could have the way you wrote that book could have taken a lot of different ways. I mean, you could have just written it from your grandmother's perspective or whatever.
True.
Instead, you chronicle each of the children. How did you decide to do that? What made
Well,
you
I
decide
think
to do
I
that?
wanted to have every person stand out and have their own story told, and to be understood as a person, as an individual, and how this, this event that my grandmother leaving them and their father dying affected each of them, and how each of them handled this situation, and yet still had such a bond of faith, in the whole family, hope that they'd be together. And they loved each other. Even though
Yes.
they were separated, they still never lost that love for each other. And I think even my grandmother, even though she had, they were hurt by her abandoning them, still, when they were together with her, they did try to love her, and I think they still loved her. I still think they still loved her, although they still had very hurt feelings,
Yes.
and they had to work those feelings out over the years. And so that's what I tried to do, and I tried to follow each person because I felt each person, even though I started this book wanting to write about my mother, every one of these people were very important to me. Very important, and very important that my family know these people. And
Yes.
because some of these people they will never know. They had passed away way before my children were here, and some died even before I was here. So it was very important for me to hold on to them and to have them known and appreciated, and always be alive, I guess, in our hearts, in our minds,
My parents are also immigrants, both from the Philippines, and I feel that my mother's sacrifice of coming out here, realization of success, financial security was never realized in her own lifetime.
Right.
But she lived to see it happen in her own children's time.
Right.
And so I like your grandmother, I think that, your grandmother seemed to suffer a lot of censure, and even the fact of alienation from her own children.
Right.
And yet the benefit, she's
Right.
vindicated because
Right.
they're all here in the United
They're all
States
here.
and have established you're here because
That's right.
of
Exactly.
her.
Exactly.
So sometimes,
That's true.
a woman's vindication doesn't come until generations later, it seems.
Yes, yes.
But it does come, especially in this book.
That's a good point, and I think that's an important point. I hope the book makes that that women always didn't have control, but I think in their own way they did the best they could, with intent of love and keeping this family surviving. She wanted to give the children an education. She wanted to give them a better life. And quite frankly, once they came to America, they did have a better life. It was not easy. It's not easy to be an immigrant to first come to this country, especially if you don't know the language, and culture is different, and
Yes.
obviously there's bias from people. But they worked through it. They survived, and then they made it better for the next generation, and then the next generation makes it better for the other generation. So they are responsible for, I would say, a good life that your family has now, that your children have, that you have. They
And
gave
how
us what we
proud,
have. Yeah.
proud your grandmother would be if she could see you on this TV show holding her up and featured prominently in your book, Journey from San Rocco. Now, what was your writing process? Did you spend hours and days, in your daily schedule? What was that like?
Well, as I say, when I first took the class, I would just write something for that week's class.
Right.
And then I took a break in the summer. I really didn't do a lot of writing, but I did a lot of research.
Yes.
That's the time I would use for my research. That's when I wanted to get more information
I
and sort of
see.
started to get into this, so that the stories would be as truthful as I can make them. I mean, it's a memoir, but it's considered a fictionalized memoir,
right,
because obviously I didn't know every person personally. I was not there,
right.
So I had to sort of create some dialogue for people, create scenes.
Correct.
I would know about something that happened, but then I have to imagine, how did they react to this, what happened, what was said, and that sort of thing. So that's how my process sort of started, and I think probably a lot of research in the early years, and I think you need to get that basis of you know, what you want, of getting to know these people and getting to know the times. I use microfiche a lot. I loved looking at pictures of the quarries of Quincy looked like. What did the 20s and 30s, what did people look like? What did they eat? What did they dress up? You know, what were they wearing?
That's right, because your ancestors came here.
Exactly.
They were Umberto was a quarryman in Quincy.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. He was a Mason, and so you had, you know, I had to know more about that. What do they look like? What do they do every day? A little bit, just not a lot to drown people, but you know, enough to, you know, create the scene and who is this person and what kind of work does he do? I mean, that had to make him a very strong person,
Oh,
too.
he came across very powerfully,
He was a powerful person.
Yes. And I could see that this book is, you know, I was very moved by your book, and I can see that you're getting a little emotional about it, too.
It's funny. Every time I read, I still read, I still cry. It's funny. And I laugh at myself because I'm like, I wrote this. This is my book. These are my family. But it's my family, and it comes back, and they become alive for me every time. You know, I read a little bit about it again or think about it.
And in our ending moments together, how can we buy Journey from San Rocco and find out what's going on with you?
Well, the book is available on Amazon.com for $17.99. It's also on all of the ebook versions, Kindle, Nook, Sony, Smashwords, whatever is out there, for $4.99. Also, I have Facebook, and you can.
What would it be under? Rosalind?
Rosalind A. Cuschera.
Okay.
The book
Rosalind
is under that A. Cuschera or Journey from San Rocco. You can look up either of the titles. And also, my website is CushRozAnne, CushRozAnne @comcast.net.
That's your email.
That's my email.
Yes.
If you are local, I can arrange to get a book to you for the cost plus shipping, if you like.
Where are you going to be speaking?
I am going to be
Anywhere
speaking.
soon?
Yes, in February I will be speaking February 6th.
February 6th.
At the Turner Free Library in Randolph.
Excellent.
At 7 p.m. And on February 19th, I will be speaking at the Norwell Free Library, Public Library, excuse me, Norwell Public Library at 7 p.m. So and I will do book signings there and so forth. So if anyone's able to come, I'd love to see them.
And I know that the Milton Public Library is planning some type of authors festival, and you're going to be featured there also.
Yes,
perhaps sometime in March we're going to get more details about that. But meanwhile, we're very grateful that you made the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Journey from San Rocco, Rosalind Cuschera, and that's CuSchera. But we're going to post that here on the show so that you'll be able to see it. And I want to thank you again.
Thank you.
Really, it's a beautiful story of your ancestors, your grandmother's sacrifice, and I think that many of us, you know, I know myself, you know, have relatives who made the great journey. Who made the great sacrifice, who didn't necessarily realize happiness or security in their own life, but they did it so that their children and generations to come and their family would realize it. And that comes across so strongly in your book.
Thank you.
Really beautifully written characters. And congratulations on your honorable mention at the New England Book Festival this year.
That's fun. I love that. I'm so excited about that. I really am. And I'm so delighted at the response the book has had. Some of the public libraries do have copies of my book, which you can take out for free. Thomas Crane Public Library has it. There's the Weymouth Library, Quincy. So there are a number of libraries. Obviously, every place I speak, I do give them a book so they can put it on the shelf if they'd like. So thank you.
Thank you again for being with us, and we're going to sign off now, and we'll see you the next time on It's All Right with Suzette. This is Suzette Standring saying happy trails in your writing path. Bye-bye.